Hello and welcome to Scale Stuff. In this week's video I'm going to be building something a bit more modern, the Trumpeter 1/72 scale Challenger 2, Britain's main battle tank, at least until the Challenger 3 gets released in a few years. Not sure if it's just being British, but I really love the look of this tank, even if the turret looks like a badly cut piece of cheese. In the box you get the parts to make the tank, gluable rubber band tracks and tow cables, an in-depth looking decal sheet to make what looks like a few versions of the tank, and a black and white paint guide and instructions. A first quick look at the sprues show that the details look quite crisp. There's a very fine flash seam around some of the parts, but that should be very easy to clean up. I'm not sure how my videos have been released, but it's been a while since I've built anything tooled after 1970, and it's quite refreshing to see a newer set of sprues on the worktop. This model was first released in 2007 and looks fairly typical of a smaller scale model of this time. Anyway, onto the build. First thing on the menu is the lower hull, adding a panel to the back of the tank. With that on, it's just a case of adding a few hooks and rollers. These go on simply, but would benefit from the use of tweezers to get in behind the lip of the fender. Be sure to keep track of which side is which and which part is which, so you don't add these bits on in the wrong way. Now it's onto the wheels. There's quite a few attachment points that need to be cleaned up here. I'm going to sand these off with my nail file. As these are simple to clean and build, I'm going to do most of the cleanup and assembly off screen. With the wheels built, it's time to add them to the lower hull. All of this is a breeze to do. It feels nice to build a more modern tank with bigger wheels to hold on to. This is how it's looking with the wheels on. Now it's around to the back panel of the tank to add a few details. A few of these parts had minor seam lines, but again these bits went on nice and easily. This model is putting me to sleep at this point, but at any point the kit could start fighting me. With some details added to the back of the tank, it's just a case of adding the fuel drums to this part, before adding the whole piece to the rear of the tank. Now the kit wants me to add the tracks, but I'm going to leave them off to make painting them later easier. Next it's on to the upper hull. First adding the mud flaps to the front of the tank, before adding details like rear view mirrors and tow points to the front upper area of the hull. Be careful when adding the rear view mirrors, as though folded down, these stems on these parts are very fragile. Now the instructions have you build a few bits in prep for the next step. The barrel had the thickest seam line I've seen in the kit so far. You know you're clutching at straws when a seam line is all you have to note on a kit. The other small details go together easily. This kit is falling into place. I feel spoilt, to be honest. This is turning into a very relaxing build. Now it's on to the upper hull. Other than a gun clip, there's nothing more to add here. With that little bit on though, it's time to add the upper hull to the lower hull. The fit here is okay, but there is a bit of a gap between the front and back of the tank and the upper piece. I'm using rubber bands to hold the bits together until the glue has dried. The instructions here also want me to add the side armour to the model, but I'm going to leave these bits off to aid in painting the wheels later on. Next up, it's onto the turret. The main upper turret had a fine layer of flash all around its edges, making it look a bit wobbly. Naturally, the model will look best with this removed. With that cleaned up though, I add the upper turret to the lower turret. The fit here again is a bit loose, so again I'm securing this while it dries with a rubber band. I'm going to wait now until the glue's dried before I add the details onto this bit. With that dry, adding the details is simple and easy though. Again, I do love the look of the Challenger turret. It might look like a lump of cheese, but it's a mean looking lump of cheese. We're approaching the end of the build now, just a couple of mudguards to add before moving on to the final couple of stages. Now it's time to build the tank's dozer blade. This stage of the build was the most difficult bit that I've done so far. It's not hard to make, it's just delicate. If I built this model again, I'd leave it to dry in between each part so that the placement was a bit more solid. With the dozer blade done though, it's now on to the final assembly stage. First I add the armour to the side pieces. Then it's onto the tow cables. I'm just adding these in with normal poly cement, as apparently these bits are gluable. Lastly, I add the clips that will hold the dozer blade. I'm dry fitting the blade but not gluing it in, as it will be easier to paint separately, and also at this point I'm not sure if I want to add the dozer blade to the final model. With those bits on though, that completes the build stage of this model kit. Now it's onto the painting. Sadly I've run out of green spray paint, so I'm basing this model in matte black and then painting on the green stripes a little bit later. As always, I'm doing the spray painting off screen, outside, to avoid fumigating myself. This is how the model is looking with the base coat down. Sadly the spray paint seemed to shrink as it dried, so I've had to go over it with a light wash of black to get into all the recessed bits that the spray paint missed. So yeah, that's why it's looking a bit blotchy at the moment. Now it's on to painting the green. First area I'm going to start on is the wheels. I'm getting these done first so I can glue the side skirts on before doing the main camo. For this I'm using Tamiya XF62 Olive Drab. Now it's on to painting the main camo. I decided with this one to just make the camo pattern up as I went along. This took quite a bit longer than I thought it would. I always forget that on modern tanks there's a lot more angles to work around. This is how the tank's looking with the first coat of camo done. Now it's time to give the tank its first wash. As the tank has black on it already, I'm using a brown and black wash to pick out the shadows on the green and muck up the black camo. Muck dry, it's now time to add the decals. Again, I'm not copying anything for this bit, just placing down what I like where I know it should be. The decals on this small scale tank are quite in depth. It would help to have tweezers to apply the smaller ones. Next it's time to do the dust coats. First I'm hitting the tank with a dry brush of Army Painter Skeleton Bone to make the tank look a little dusty. Now I'm giving the tank a dry brush of Army Painter Elf Green. I think I've dulled the tank down a bit too much at this point, so I'm hoping that a dry brush of green will make the greens brighter and make the black paint look like it's worn off of a green base on the edges. Next up, it's time to paint the details on the tank. Firstly, I'm getting a coat down on the fire extinguishers and rear lights. For this, I'm using Army Painter Pure Red. Then it's onto the headlights, giving the lenses a quick hit of Army Painter Plate Mail. Next, I paint the beacon on the turret. I'm painting this orange over a white base coat so the beacon looks nice and bright. Finally, I paint all of the visors and viewport glass in an orangey pink mix. Normally I'd paint these bits blue, but having looked at quite a few reference pictures, the glass seems to have a pink sheen to it, so yeah, that's what I'm going to paint the ones on my model, with a little bit of a pink sheen to it. Lastly, it's time to paint the tracks. Off screen I've sprayed them in a base coat of matte black. First, it's a quick dry brush with Army Painter Gunmetal. Then I highlight the rubber pads with some matte black. While all this is still wet, I'm going over the tracks with some Vallejo European earth. Once this dust coats on, I coat it in a wash of BS dark earth and then rub my finger along the tracks, removing most of the mess from the raised rubber runners and highlighting these bits and giving it that kind of meh running through the mud look. With the tracks dry, I add them to the tank. For this, I'm simply super gluing the tracks of the wheels and tucking the ends up into the fenders where the ends won't be seen. Finally, I give the tank some mud splatter using my favourite BS dark earth. I apply this to the tracks and lower hull in a focused manner to make the tank look like it's been around in the world a bit. And with that on, I think I'm going to call this model done. This is the finished model. I'm not sure if I've over weathered it, but I really like the worn, faded, dirty effect it's given the tank. In conclusion, the Trumpeter 1/72 scale Challenger 2 is a nice kit. Overall, the model is very simple and easy to build with a good level of detail. There's not much in the way of cleanup needed on most of this model, but there are some areas like the turret that seem to have gotten the lion's share of the flash, so you need to watch out for this. The fit is really good on all of the smaller parts, but some of the bigger parts like the main turret and hull will need rubber bands to hold the parts together while the glue dries to get a flush fit. I think most modelers could build this model kit, even a beginner, as it's pretty straightforward. However, tweezers are a must for adding some of the smaller parts and decals included in this kit. This model cost me £14 brand new, and I think for what you get in the box, it's good value for this great little model kit. Anyway, that's my build and review of the 1/72 scale Trumpeter Challenger 2. As always, thank you for watching. If you made it this far, please consider subscribing so you don't miss out on future releases. Until next time though, look after yourselves and have a good one. Goodbye.